know me so well. The fact of the matter is that I did none of those things. I acted under color of law. I acted by authorization of Governor Rutledge. I did what was ordered that I do.
Well, maybe so, sir. To excuse everything by saying you acted under the law. But we're talking about individual acts. We're talking about cruelty, unnecessary cruelty, willfulness.
You are asserting that I engaged in any such personal action, sir.
No, but I think your men did, sir. And I will say to you, I do not accuse you personally of that. But I do think that there were some steps that you might have taken, such as I took, to prevent that among your men.
Well, perhaps. I never believed they would work with the people I was with.
Speaking of denial, do you deny what I've heard about Sumter's law?
Yes, it was not Sumter's law, it was Rutledge's law.
And you put the blame on our governor?
There's no blame. We are following the law.
So we put the blame on the law?
What blame, sir?
It did not occur under my control. It did under yours.
It could
That's
have.
the difference.
Well, if you chose to operate your command that way, I'm not sure what your situation was. I know you had much easier pickings down here in the low country. So it was fairly easy to get the things you needed. I know you also had no force anywhere near the size of mine most of the time. Most of your men live at home, stay at home, sustain themselves at home.
Yes.
You do not try to have the kind of, except perhaps once, the kinds of cross-state operations that I have. These things require supplies. Now, are you also speaking about the state troops?
Yes.
Well, you were one.
Yes. We were possessed down here of our own properties. We were beset by loyalists, just as you were in your areas. And we defended ourselves, and we freed ourselves, not only from the loyalists and their new loyalties, but against the British Army, the greatest army in the world. And we defeated them.
Well, I don't think you can prove by me that they were the greatest army in the world.
And who else would you think might be?
Well, I certainly wouldn't think anyone who fought over on this continent was. They certainly did not behave like it. Now, understand, the war we were fighting was a world war. The best of the British Army was elsewhere. We never encountered that. Maybe you're right to take it as a whole. But they only gave us, fortunately, a portion, and not even a great portion, of what was available to them.
They put their whole force, sir, on us in the South, and you bore that burden just like I did.
Oh, my whole force. Clinton had more men in New York than there ever down here.
And they were not fighting, and there were no battles.
They had men in India, they had men in Africa, they had men in Europe. This is
That's a British Empire you're talking about.
Absolutely, and the British Army had to defend the entire empire.
Well, aren't we talking about the army that was here?
I would say.
And aren't we saying that
was
Clinton and the others who were in New York, for a large part after the original fighting had begun and ended up there in 1778, I believe it was. From then on, all the fighting of great significance until Yorktown was here.
Yes, certainly was.
And sir, I do agree that you carried a load. I just think you carried it ignominiously.
It's most unfortunate. I had come here to inquire after your health after you were ill. I haven't seen you in a good while. I haven't been by your house in quite a good while. I didn't expect to be personally assaulted coming in. Perhaps you have a different understanding of hospitality than I grew up with.
Touche.
Sir, that is a good point. I have not been a hospitable host. On the other hand, I have grown old and feeble, and I think I do not have many more days in which I can speak from the bottom of my heart as to what I believe and what I believe is right as well as what I believe is wrong. And I think this needs to be settled between you and me and those who follow us before it's written down and becomes part of the next generation's gospel truth.
Well, I certainly agree with you on many of those points, except the first. You appear to me to have more than just a few days left on this earth. Certainly, your spirit is in the indication, as I've seen it tonight, you'll be here a very long time.
I appreciate that comment, and I will say the same to you.
Thank you, I must say.
I know from what has happened to you in the last 4 or 5 years that I have heard about, since I have retired from public life, you have become active, and you have served the state and yourself in a good many ways.
I have always thought that it was a proper thing for someone through his own labor and mind to rise in society, but I don't know anything else that you're particularly referring to. You're suggesting some impropriety, are you?
Not an impropriety, except for the fact that I know that you have been elected to Congress.
Yes, well, that may be impropriety. I have indeed. I have spent 2 terms in Congress. I learned a great deal in Congress. I was able to live there, talk to people, met some people. I was part of a dining club with Jefferson and Madison and Monroe and Sam Smith and a number of other people we'd only heard mentioned by name. You know, it's ironic. I was born not far from Jefferson and Madison, same neighborhood. The case of Jefferson, well, not far from where Jefferson grew up, but of course there was 10, 11 years difference, age difference. He's a good bit younger than I am. But you hear about the things the man wrote, you read the pamphlets, you read the Declaration of Independence, you look at Madison, you read the Constitution, you hear, however imperfectly, of his role, and of course those newspaper articles he wrote advocating the ratification of it. And I never did think that I'd be having supper regularly with men like that. That was quite a rewarding experience to be that way. It was from one little locality all around back together to a supper table. And I must tell you that sitting at the same supper table while Thomas Jefferson and James Madison are talking is an experience both rewarding and personally humiliating. The idea that one even opens one's mouth in their presence, given what they talk about, is a little bit intimidating. I don't think the British ever intimidated me that much. So yes, I've been to Congress. I have seen much of how the nation runs. I have learned a great deal that shed some light for me on our war down here. And it's helped me to understand some things that had puzzled me for a long time. I would rather that we did not have this system. I did oppose this Constitution. But having it, I'm with South Carolina, I'm with the Union, and I'm willing to do my part here.
I recognize that you have had advantages that I have not had since our war has been over. And I appreciate those, and I think perhaps you have done good service, not only for our state, but for the nation. And for that I'm grateful, because I do believe in our system, and I hope that our system will work.
That is still open to some question, you understand?
I agree. I will say one other thing that has bothered me, and that is I understand that you have spent some years confined in jails. I've never had that experience. Can you explain?
Well, I hardly think it's going to add up to a term of years, Marion. Maybe you put it all together, it might come up to that. I spent a good many evenings in jail, I'm told, that I do not remember. In my younger years, before I joined the military, I grew up very poor on the Virginia frontier. My daddy was a miller. Died when I was young. My mama rented me out like a slave to be the plowboy behind the neighbor's horses. As soon as I was old enough to hold up the plow, I was back there doing that. And whenever I could, I'd be breaking away to go to the mill and the tavern. I loved people, and I was soon associating with all the other boys in the neighborhood, mostly in those kind of environments, much to my mother's despair.
Is that the reason you went to jail? Because you were rowing?
That's one reason. I would be getting in fights, and I'm afraid I was much too fond of my drink in those days. And I did spend some time there. Now, there's been a couple of other occasions more recently. One of them had to do, well, both of them had to do with debt. One of them had to do particularly with some money that I borrowed. Have you been, not wishing to probe too private clearing. But you know that in these days, the absence of a sufficient circulating currency is maddening to everyone, and almost everything we do, unless you happen to have some resources, has to be done on credit.
I have had that experience.
And credit means bonds, and bonds mean lawyers, and that means interest, and that's going to mean lawsuits, because we simply don't have enough currency to do the job in our growing country. And by the way, we are growing. South Carolina is going to be great if we can get these canals through. That's what I'm going to Charleston about. But at any rate, that's something we need to deal with as well. And it was worse after the Currency Act that the British put on us before the war. And the only way you can get anything is by signing bonds.
Yes.
And some credit. So I bought some supplies that I intended to take. You remember I was an emissary, sort of an emissary to the Cherokee.
Yes, I remember. I remember a story that I'll ask you about in a little bit, that you had actually been to England with those Cherokees.
And this is part of it, but one of my intentions was to set up
Excuse me, sir, my experience with the Cherokees is that I was shooting at them and they were shooting at me.
Yes.
And you carried them as a friend to England.
Well, not as a friend, but I hope I became a friend of them. I was, my first military experience was, of course, against the British and the French and their Indian allies up at Braddock's defeat up in Pennsylvania. They raised a unit, and not having much of a future or anything else to do and not wanting to stay where I was, I joined up. Best decision, well, one of the better decisions I ever made, maybe the second best. And after that, the war broke out along the frontier with the Cherokee. And Virginia was at war with the Cherokee, and North Carolina was at war with the Cherokee, and South Carolina was at war with the Cherokee. And I fought with Adam Stevens' troops in southern Virginia, Holston River. We're heading for the over mountain towns. So I've been shooting at plenty of Cherokee, and plenty of Cherokee been shooting at me. But we won that war. The Cherokee decided they didn't want any more of it. Now you have my undying gratitude for this, sir. You convinced them they did not want any more. And after you had finished driving through their country, we promised to do the same. They decided they wanted no more of that, so they agreed to an agreement. But then, as you know, the Cherokee don't read and write, except individuals perhaps, but their culture doesn't. They decided they needed to have an official from our government in Virginia to talk the treaty, carry the treaty, they said. Now, what they meant is they're going to have these big gatherings of people, and the official's going to talk to them and tell them what the treaty is all about. Right? That's the deal. And my commander, Lieutenant Henry Timberlake, volunteered to go. One of the finest men it's ever been my privilege to meet, Lieutenant Timberlake. And there's another turning point in my life getting to know him. He asked me to go along with him. And I decided in doing this that it would be a good idea perhaps if we could set up some kind of trading post or some kind of operation there that would enable regular contact with the Cherokee and, of course, get them used to that. You know, good trade relations tends to keep the peace. And finding insufficient time to try to convince any government official at that time, and who would listen to a sergeant anyway, that this was a good thing to do on this mission, undertook to take some supplies down there myself and sign my name on a bond for them. Unfortunately, on the journey down, not to get into too much detail, I know you don't like a whole lot of detail about some things, at least. The canoe overturned, and much of that was lost. And being otherwise penniless at the moment, I was liable ultimately for when that bond came due. I, from that point, stayed with Timberlake. And then we took the Indians back into Virginia. They a delegation of them wanted to talk to the governor. And so we agreed, took them back. And then while we were there, one of the Indians looked up and saw a picture of King George III. And he was entranced. And he said, now I know this is the person who's behind all the rest of this. I must see him personally. And I don't know why he did it. I thought this was a strange idea, but the governor said, fine. And at that point, the chief said, and I want him, and he pointed to Lieutenant Timberlake, and him, and he pointed to me, to come with me. And the governor said, fine. So next thing you know, Blake and me have got brand new bright red uniforms, much better than anything we ever got when we were campaigning. And we're on a boat on the way to England. Him and me and a translator. And this is the touchy point. I didn't know much Cherokee. I picked up a little, but not much. Blake didn't either. So we had a translator who unfortunately got sick and died on the way over. Now you imagine this. We get to England, get in the boats, and the Cherokee coming out of their cabins have painted themselves up like we thought some kind of war party or something. They started screaming these hoops and things. It's some kind of welcoming ceremony, they said, but they certainly chilled a lot of the British people when they see them rolling up here and they start talking. I didn't know what they were saying. Neither did Timberlake, but we faked something and trying to say this is a welcome and we're happy to be here. And then we had to tell the Cherokee something because they didn't know English either. That was an experience. I stayed up there for several weeks. They were popular. Everybody wanted to see the Indians. You know, we had people in England painting themselves up and passing themselves off as the Cherokee chiefs and charging admission to see them in the streets. And we even had our own servants in the house they'd assigned to us, charging admission for people to come in the back door to go watch the Cherokee sleep or eat or smoke or whatever they were doing. I tried to come in the back way once with a friend, and they didn't recognize me. The servants didn't, I guess. And they tried to charge me admission.
And did you pay it, sir?
I did, but not in the coin he expected. And of course, he had a relative who had some influence, and he tried to make trouble, but we took care of him too. Lieutenant Timberlake saw that. I didn't ask any other questions.
You spoke of a moment ago of being penniless. After the war was over, and after the British left Charlestown...
You're talking about I was talking about the French and Indian War. You're talking about the Revolution?
Well, you just mentioned the word penniless.
Yes, well,
and I caught on to that because in my lifetime I have been penniless. I was as soon as the British had agreed and were finally vacated Charlestown, and I came back to this place. And as you have so kindly mentioned, we have made some progress in repair. Have you ever been penniless, sir, since the war?
Not only penniless, but deeply in debt.
Yes.
Yes, so that's even below penniless. But I have had assets. Owned considerable amounts of land before the war.
Yeah.
And land is still land. And was able to, now again, I had to sign bonds on a lot of this, but I had plans. And I've still got plans. I see a bright future for this place, Marion. I see South Carolina becoming more vibrant, more lively, more prosperous than it was even before the Troubles. And I see it coming because all of these people are coming here to settle. You know, the territory between here and Camden was held out from settlement for many a year. They thought they were going to put another township in there and then didn't. Only later opened it up, and it's still got a lot of opportunities. Virginians, North Carolinians have been coming in here, like, just filling the place up. The problem is that no matter what they want to do economically, getting it to market's going to be a problem, unless they just want to grow just enough for a local market. So finding the right crop or the right product of any kind has been difficult. But the solution is in these canals, and the solution is in the mills. And I know mills. Haven't grown up around one. And I have already undertaken, again, going in debt, but this is a debt that earns money to pay its own way back. We call it investment. I have invested in a string of mills, oven, grist mills, and better yet, sawmills, because so many people mean so many houses means a need for lumber. I've got sawmills and grist mills dotted all up and down the river between here, roughly, up toward Nielsen's Ferry and Charlotte. And I'm already a member of a company that is trying to make the Catawba, Wateree River, and Santee River navigable to Charleston in small boats. And once we get that finished, from Charlotte to Charleston without ever having to leave your boat except to sleep at night, all the way, this is going to be the source of prosperity for us. And this is what I have put a lot of money into. And it has paid off somewhat. Most of the stores have done well. And mills, you know, Marion, people can't do without flour and meal. Mills pay off if you know how to run a mill. And I found people, I know something about it, I know building them, and I found the right people to do them. So some of that's paid off. The other problem, of course, is that anytime you're dealing totally in credit, you're going to have disagreements, misunderstandings. And as soon as somebody looks like he's doing all right, here come the lawyers. And here come all these people that hold these bonds and claim this should have been redeemed at an earlier time because what looks like a 6 there is really a 4, and therefore it's due this year, not 2 years from now. And all the fees that the lawyers charge eat you up. And I have been burdened with these lawsuits. And many of the allegations you may have heard have probably come from some of these without substance, but they are troublesome lawsuits.
I'm interested at this conversation and the way that conversation has turned, because you tell me things about business and how you make money and how you have invested.
Yes.
And it seems to me, sir, and forgive me if I speak too harshly when I am to be hospitable to you, but it seems to me that you're more concerned about your own future and your own finances than you are about the development of our state and our nation. I think the most important thing that we need to do in the state of South Carolina right now is to develop an education system so that all of our people can be educated. If indeed we are going to have a republic, we need to have educated voters. And that, I think, is the pressing need, more so than individual fortune.
Well, of course, without individual fortunes, there will be no money to tax. There will be no fortunes of any kind in a system such as we have, including the state's fortune.
That is what people who have fortunes always say.
Or those who aspire to them. Now, I don't know how you balance mine. It depends on the county. I am a businessman. I'm not a farmer. I'm not a miller myself. I know how to do this. But I do have dreams, and I am working on them. These canals are going to open up the state for everyone. Now, you talk about an education system. I would love to see that. I think that would be a wonderful thing. But of what possible good is it going to do? We have a so-called republic like we have in South Carolina, with the representation in our legislature so badly out of balance with the voting population.
I think that the educational system will right that in balance, in time.
Well, I don't think the system will, but perhaps more and more people being educated will. But I don't think the greatest amount of education will induce those rice planters on the coast to give up the power they hold.
I understand that as a problem. Let me ask you something else, because I've heard kind remarks about your wife and about your family. And I will ask you, as your host, how are they? And I hope that they are doing well.
Thank you very kindly. Thank you. That's the best decision I ever made with Mary. That was something I never quite expected. I knew she was an admirable woman, but I never quite knew what I was getting when I got her. She's doing well as she can, sir. Of course, you know that she's partially paralyzed. She does not use but one hand, and that not quite so well as others cannot walk. But that has never seemed to stop her. She's been able to do things, and she's always kept an interest in things. She's the reason I learned to speak better and to read better. I never had much schooling either. I never had a proper education either, so she would be upset if she heard me say something like I just did. But yes, she's well. My son is well. I'm looking forward to what can be passed on to him in the way of an educational legacy, as well as some travel, as well as some prosperity, or at least a basis on which he can build his own. I think the next generation is, of course, what we're all fighting for, so it's quite important.
I'm touched for you to have such kind words to say, and such pleasant words to say about your married life. I will tell you a little bit about my own. I recently married. As you know, I was not married during the war, but only afterwards. And my wife is named Esther. She's inside. I will carry you in that you may greet her later.
I would be honored.
We have had a pleasant life together. You mentioned a son that you had. Of course, I have no children, but I have several some nephews who are very close to me and that I have looked upon with a paternal affection.
And you are indeed blessed.
I am indeed blessed, and so are you. Shall we go inside and let me introduce you to my wife?
Why, thank you, sir.
And I will thank you for being here and for having this conversation. I feel better for having come closer to the truth from what I had heard from you in the past.
I think
Journalists, would you care to take any questions from the observers?
The first question is, where did I leave my glasses? I want you to know that while we shook hands and parted with less recrimination than the way we started, he is not yet into the category of friends.
No, I would agree with that. I came here with the intention of trying to change his mind about a couple of things, but that was not one of them. And of course, the conversation about family turned us in another direction as well. And that is a joyous thing to have a family. I must constantly think about how blessed I am with the wife I got. And this is something people might not have expected, but Mary Candy has turned out to be more than a perfect wife of someone like me. So again, I congratulate Mr. Marion on his choice as well. But this is something that meant something to me.
General, I understand that you invested in the Santee Canal. Was that in combination with General Sumter? Well, both of you. There was
I am
a
certainly well invested in the director of it, with General Moultrie as leading this effort. Yes, a canal to connect the Santee
Right.
with the Cooper River.
And I understand General Marion crosses his land, and that he
I
also...
promise that. But I have not the money to invest. But nevertheless, I agree with General Sumter that it will be a step forward in transportation, but in commerce. And it will probably draw our state closer together. We're still in problems by the fact that we were so divided during the war. The up country and the low country, those were differences. And we were divided by rivers. Now, perhaps with the canal, we'll be united by the rivers. And instead of being barriers, they will become roads.
We still have difficulties with this. My aversion to the planters of the coast. The fact is, they do control. Let me put it this way: by the 1790 census, a parish end a little bit west of here, of Pont Bluff, all the way back, holds 80%. That's 8 of every 10 of South Carolina's voters. And yet in both houses of the legislature, a majority of the seats comes from here to the coast. Now, whatever ties us together is going to bring this disparity even more vividly into view. And something is going to give. And already the backcountry people have shown their willingness, if it comes to this, to pick up those guns again. And I am trying my best to make sure that does not happen, but the only way it is not going to happen is fair representation for all parts of our state. That's one thing I hope to bring up and never got around to.
Well, it's a concept of a republic, that we are representatives and we need to be represented equally. The people in this area, some of my cousins, and close cousins at that, are among those who are overrepresented. And it is very, very difficult to get those who are in favored positions to voluntarily surrender those positions. Perhaps that will happen.
We may hope.
Other remarkable things that happen, maybe that too.
Perhaps so.
General Marion, did the canal cover part of your land?
Yes, it does. It is projected, of course. Once that canal is built, I anticipate some other people moving in. Alas, I think I will long be gone from this earth before that happens.
I wouldn't put money on that.
Was there a precedent for the type of warfare that you carried on? Were you aware of it in the past, or did you come up with this on your own?
I will answer first if you will follow afterwards, and perhaps we'll give you the same answer. The precedent that I followed was some self-learning that I learned when I fought against the Indians. There was no possible way that we, backwoodsmen like we were, unskilled in the arts of war, very, very slightly experienced as militiamen, could stand up against the British Army. And therefore we could not fight in the sort of traditional warfare that the British Army was accustomed to. We had to develop some other way. And we just used our own common sense. We took advantage of opportunities when they came, and we practiced our own system of fighting. And so there was no written book about it, and there was really not much experience. We sort of did it ourselves.
Or did you have any idea that what you did be repeated many times in the future, that people would refer back to you as the person who began this type of warfare?
I think the history books will not mention me. I'm not that important. Perhaps General Sumter has a different answer.
Well, the only different answer I would have is to call yourself a backwoods militiaman grossly understate your abilities, contribution, and experience, sir. You were commander of the 2nd South Carolina, a regular professional Army organization. Now, granted, it was our state's professional Army, but you had people living in barracks, uniformed by the state, paid by the state, fed by the state, drilled by the state, and I know you were proud of those men when you put them together and made them work. And I know you applied the lash a great deal sometimes, because the kind of people that you were pulling into this outfit are not the kind of people that may well be persuaded by anything else, and the state backed you up and gave you the articles of war necessary for you to do that.
They did the same thing for you, sir.
But not only that, you had trained your men in the 2nd, those of your men in the 2nd, in artillery usage, and when the time came at Fort Sullivan, these were no raw militiamen in Fort Sullivan. These were trained professionals, albeit trained only a year or so, but still, this was something different. What General Marion did was to change his military lifestyle when he was assigned to come down to Williamsburg. It is not that he did not know, but he is right that the material we had to work with was quite different. Now, as for myself, I knew nothing. But I learned as he did. I learned against the Indians, varied Indians. I learned a great deal just talking to people who were in the Army with me. I learned much from some of the Cherokee when I lived among them. I learned a great deal from some of my Catawba friends. But I think I already knew pretty well what kind of warfare we were going to be fighting, simply because we had no choice of any other kind. This was simply a matter of practicality. You do what you have to do under the circumstances. It was never my goal to attack a British unit. It was never my goal to have a stand-up battle, a traditional thing. Pardon me if I overstate, I believe my colleague longed for the opportunity, given enough men and the proper circumstance. I do believe he would have looked at that. I did not. I cared not. I simply wanted to get the enemy away from my home and my state. I learned a great deal about what not to do in Georgia. 1778 at that momentum campaign. And you were there too. The 2nd was down there as well. We were so misused and so scattered and left in dangerous locations, not only dangerous from the enemy, but dangerous from disease, some of the foulest air I have ever breathed, and it almost killed me down there. And the commanders, the command structure. The Georgia Continentals and the Georgia militia were both there, and could not get along with each other, to the point that the commander of the one challenged the commander of the other to a duel and killed him. And he was a signer they were both signers of the Declaration of Independence. This is a mess. And I knew that, I learned what not to do as well. So no, I never knew any particular precedent beyond my own experience and that of people I had an opportunity to speak with It was simply I thought, a practical response to the situation facing us.
As he said, we did what we had to do and what we could do. And in Georgia, as he was talking about, we made the mistake of trying to make a charge, and we had divided command. And we waited too long before we made the charge, and it was terrible. In my attempts to capture Georgetown, it was something I particularly wanted to do because I lived in that area. On the best occasion I had, it was to assault Georgetown. But I knew that there was development there and protections there for the British defenders and the loyalists. And so I had to forego the chance of a European-style battle to capture the city. And so we played the war by those opportunities and rules that would benefit us. And that's what most of us do. We do what we can with what we've got when we can do it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Well said.
Anyone that can spare us a few minutes to help us load trucks and cars and put this thing back in the schoolroom with configuration.
When you're filming